An out-of-control jet sets the financial core on fire.
It was a disaster.
The president's right-hand man is killed in the crash.
A major political figure for the future in Mexico.
In a nation at war with drug cartels,
there was a lot of narco trafficking going on, a lot of drug culture.
It seems the violence has reached a terrifying new level.
Oh my God!
It was a natural question. Was this an assassination?
Mayday, mayday.
November the 4th, 2008. A Learjet 45 is cruising over central Mexico.
Victor Mike Charlie, radar contact. Descend to 200.
200, Mike Charlie.
Alvaro Sanchez and Martin Oliva are at the controls. Both pilots are captains. But tonight, Captain Oliva is flying the plane.
I'll start setting 250, Alvaro, okay?
Sounds right to me.
The flight is a special government charter.
We must be getting close.
The country's interior minister and his entourage are flying to Mexico City.
We have a few minutes. Show me that report.
Juan Camilo Murillo is just 37 years old and already a rising star on the Mexican political scene.
Anybody who becomes Interior Secretary has become a very important figure in Mexican politics. He was considered a personal friend of President Felipe Calderón.
The politicians are on their way back to the capital after a day of talks aimed at combating the nation's skyrocketing rate of violent crime.
2008 was a key year in terms of drug-related violence in Mexico, a year of major escalation. And we saw a time where people began to get very worried about where this could go.
The Mexican government has chartered a Learjet 45 for the flight. It's a high-performance aircraft that's also economical to fly.
Victor Mike Charlie, descend to 15,000 feet. Altimeter 3024.
15,000 with 3024, Mike Charlie.
When Bombardier designed this airplane, they designed it from the ground up and made it a lot more efficient. It's safer, it's easy to fly. It's very user-friendly, if you will.
1,000 feet until we level off.
Thanks, Alvaro.
As the Learjet nears the outskirts of Mexico City, the pilots prepare to land.
Landing lights. Yep. Check.
The crew can see the aircraft ahead of them on the approach route.
Look.
Yeah. They're all lined up in front of us. Just in time for rush hour.
If you've ever looked out into the sky from the approach end of an airport, you see, looks like a string of Christmas lights. Each light is a plane lined up one after the other, coming in on a very steady, orderly approach.
It's a busy international airport. It's the main airport for Mexico City, which is a huge city, so you have traffic from all over the world coming in there.
Victor Mike Charlie, reduce your speed to 180 knots.
Reducing speed to 180, Mike Charlie.
The air traffic controller asks the Learjet crew to slow down to maintain their position in the lineup of planes.
The approach into Mexico City requires a turn that's greater than 90 degrees. Things are coming at you fast. ATC telling you to turn this heading, maintain this speed, slow down to this speed.
Should I pull the nose up?
No, leave it. Leave it for now.
Tonight, Alvaro Sanchez is serving as something of a mentor.
But we're about to level off, right?
Yes.
He's more experienced in the Learjet than Captain Oliva.
There, speed stabilized.
Okay.
This is one of the busiest and most critical stages of any flight.
Flap down.
Sanchez extends the flaps so he can further reduce their speed.
Here, ATC is sequencing you, and they're basically telling you where to go, how fast to go, how high to go, how low to go, in order to sequence the traffic into the airport.
Give me 8800, please.
8800.
They're about 5.5 miles away, right over the heart of downtown Mexico City.
Below them, Mexico City is a sprawling metropolis of 20 million people, with some of the worst traffic in the world. A sea of cars fills the downtown core.
Oh my God!
All of a sudden, chaos. They're flown upside down, and they're hurtling towards the ground. Screams, pandemonium, sheer terror.
Without warning, the Learjet goes into a steep dive and plummets towards the ground.
What do we do? Alvaro!
Give it to me! Give it to me!
The first officer calls for control of the plane.
It's yours, Alvaro!
He hauls his control column back, trying to pull the plane out of the dive. Ulrike Bjorkstam is in the street below, waiting for a cab.
All of a sudden, I saw this plane flying like really low. I had the time to turn around and I started running away from it. But of course, the plane was a little bit faster than what I was.
They aren't much higher than the skyscrapers in downtown. They can read the signs on the buildings. They can see the people walking on the streets.
I remember thinking that, well, this is it. This is it for me.
Learjet Victor Mike Charlie has devastated Mexico City's financial district.
It was a disaster. Witnesses said that the flames reached higher than the surrounding buildings.
None of the 9 people on board have survived. The crash has also killed 7 people on the ground and injured dozens more. Ulrike Bjorkstam has been knocked senseless by the blast and scorched by the flames.
I was quite badly burned, and it was almost as if I heard a voice in my head. It was this one thought that I had, that I need to get up now if I'm ever gonna get up. Just remember, like, a lot of explosions, cars exploding, and there was this man running towards me and asking me, like, what was that? What happened? Was it a bomb? Like, no, it was a plane.
Hasta el momento se tiene confirmado, según Marcelo Ebrard, que el secretario de Gobernación Murillo, bueno, pues...
Mexico City is in chaos as crews battle to control the fire. The sudden loss of the Interior Minister leaves the country in shock and the government facing a potential crisis. There's immediate speculation that the crash is related to Mexico's war on drugs.
This happened in a year when there have been intense confrontations between drug cartels and police, when drug cartel assassins had been murdering officials in their own homes.
Adding to the speculation is the fact that Mexico's drug czar, José Luis Santiago Vasconcelos, was also on board.
He was on the front line of the legal action against drug cartels, which are very powerful in Mexico. So a very important job, a very high-pressure job.
This crash had huge implications for Mexican politics. There were important people on this plane, so it was a natural question, was this an assassination?
The morning after a government Learjet slams into the heart of Mexico City, investigators begin their work at what may well be a crime scene. One of the high-ranking politicians on board, José Luis Santiago Vasconcelos, has been a target in the past.
He had said there had been threats against him, and they discovered a plot to try and kill him.
Have the cartels finally succeeded? If so, it would mark a dangerous escalation in their war against the Mexican government.
This is really concerning. This is no longer simply a criminal problem. It's starting to become a national security issue. And there was much fear across the country.
Desperate to quell public anxiety, Mexico asks for help from the United States. They call in the FBI and the National Transportation Safety Board. The NTSB's Joe Cedar knows this is an assignment like no other.
As soon as we heard that there was what we would say the equivalent of the Mexican vice president on board, I knew that it was going to be a very political investigation and would require a lot of politics, a lot of interpersonal skills, more than even just the technical side of things.
Joe Cedar, NTSB.
Amid the chaos of the crash site, Cedar's first job is to try to identify all the aircraft debris.
All right, if you're absolutely sure it's from the plane, it goes over there. Okay? Everything else I want here.
It's a monumental task. With so much damage to buildings, cars, and the city itself, isolating wreckage from the Learjet is next to impossible.
This plane crashed into rush hour traffic in the middle of one of the world's biggest, busiest cities. There's wreckage everywhere. There's debris. Is it a car? Is it a plane? Who knows? I mean, it's just a mess.
Investigators make an early breakthrough. They recover the plane's flight data recorder. If it survived the fire, it could hold crucial clues about what went wrong.
We can glean out a lot of information from the recordings from air traffic control, from the impact, from radar, but to get some very specific information, we would really want that flight data recorder to tell us what the flight of the aircraft was.
That's great. One down, one to go. All right, it's got to be nearby. Let's keep looking.
But the second black box, the cockpit voice recorder, is still missing. Investigators need to find it, and fast. Faced with the suspicious death of two key members of the government, President Felipe Calderón himself is watching their every move.
In fact, I briefed the president of Mexico, President Calderón, at least 3 or 4 times. I was dealing with his aide, his personal aide, on a daily basis, if not hourly basis. One of the things that he wanted to prove was that this was not either a drug hit or a political assassination.
President Felipe Calderón was very vested in this case. So the pressure on the investigators doing this was absolutely immense. They had to get answers. They had to get them soon.
Investigators intensify their search for the missing voice recorder.
All right, this is what we're looking for. But bear in mind, it might not be orange anymore. With a fire like that, this thing could be burnt black. All right, let's go, spread out.
We got photos down so that everybody would know what it looked like, and we had to tell them, no, these are orange photos, but they could be anywhere from brown to black to being crumpled up.
While aircraft investigators comb through the wreckage, the FBI begins testing for explosive residue, evidence that a bomb downed the plane. But with so much debris to test, getting a definitive answer won't be easy. An intensive search for the cockpit voice recorder turns up nothing. Until an overlooked piece of blackened debris suddenly catches an investigator's eye.
It was interesting because we had been walking over the CVR the entire time we were on scene. But because it was brownish black and it was on its side, I believe, that we just didn't identify it initially.
Let's see what we got here. I must have walked over this 10 times.
Mexican investigators will accompany the boxes to Washington, D.C., where experts at the NTSB will do their best to recover the crucial data.
They do not have the recorder labs available like we have here in the NTSB. And so they were very open to the fact that as soon as they found it, it was a given that they were going to be coming to Washington, D.C.
Oh, what have we got here?
Back at the crash site, a wing embedded in the roof of a car is one of dozens of pieces of wreckage Cedar needs to chart.
It's the right side. It's the right wingtip.
He wants to know if the plane came down in one piece, or if it broke apart in mid-flight, something that would point strongly to a bomb.
Well, this is the nose. The whole plane's here. There's no way it blew apart in the air.
So we had the left wingtip, both left and right, horizontal stabilizer and the vertical stabilizer. This told us that the whole aircraft had made it to the accident site, as we say.
The fact that the debris was so tightly clustered together on the ground really was strong evidence against the notion of an in-flight explosion.
Mexican and US investigators breathe a collective sigh of relief. FBI test results confirm the finding.
Yeah, I gotta go. All right, bye.
There's no evidence of a bomb.
When the FBI took samples around various parts of the aircraft, and even, I believe, even on parked cars and in the building, they found no trace of any explosive device.
But the way the wreckage has fallen does provide a puzzling detail about how the plane came down.
Looks like the plane was heading west when they hit the ground. Flying away from the airport, that way. So why are they flying the wrong way?
We knew that he was coming into Mexico City, and the first thing that we noticed was that the aircraft, when it struck the ground, was actually moving away from the airport.
The Learjet crashed into the heart of Mexico City at the height of rush hour. Investigators hope to find somebody who saw something that might explain the odd flight path.
So you didn't see it in the air at all?
But they're out of luck. Witnesses can only describe the moment of impact and the terrifying aftermath.
Nobody knew what had happened and what it was that exploded, because there were several explosions. I think maybe 2 from the plane, and then of course all the cars. It was a very chaotic situation, a lot of panic in people's minds, like, what's going on?
No one can tell investigators anything about how the plane was flying before it suddenly changed direction and crashed.
How we say it with investigators is the accident didn't happen here. This was the result. The impact of the ground was the result of the accident, which occurred at altitude. And because of that, we didn't really have any witnesses to that part of the flight.
It's a disappointing setback for investigators. One that only increases the pressure to explain the mysterious crash in the Mexican capital. At a state funeral, the Mexican president honors the victims of an air disaster that set Mexico City ablaze and shook the nation to its core.
Al licenciado Juan Camilo Mourinho Terrazo, secretario de Gobernación, así como a sus destacados...
President Felipe Calderón lost a good friend and a protege, as well as his number 2 in the government.
The somber moment is a reminder that there is still no explanation for the crash that killed 16 people. For those who survived, it's a reminder of how lucky they are.
I felt guilty of being alive because so many other people got killed, and it could have been me. So why did I survive and not the rest of the people who were next to me on the street?
At the NTSB lab in Washington, D.C., all eyes are on the plane's flight data recorder, or FDR. It could hold vital clues, data that will explain exactly what happened in the last moments of the flight.
Flight data recorders can hold up to several thousand streams of data at any time. This includes everything from control inputs, control surfaces, speed, temperature, pressure, pretty much everything an investigator would want to look at.
Technicians manage to download all the data, but investigators quickly realize it won't be any help in solving the crash. The information is more than 2 years old. The recorder stopped working long before the accident flight.
It was a very disappointing news to hear that we did not have any of the accident flight recorded.
Investigators need a new strategy if they hope ever to understand why the Learjet ended up flying the wrong way. They turned to security cameras mounted in and around Mexico City's financial district.
One of the advantages of an urban environment for investigators is that there's a lot of cameras around.
Yeah, one of these cameras must have been looking in the right direction.
We just basically said, find every and all video that is available from every building around.
It's a long shot, but there's a chance a camera may have captured images of the Learjet in flight.
Witnesses and their memory are good, but they're not exact. Video, on the other hand, is very important to us, especially if we don't have any FDR data.
Next.
Cedar hopes the gamble will pay off. He scans through the video frame by frame, focusing on the critical seconds just before the crash.
Next.
Most of the cameras are aimed at the ground.
Next.
Too low to show the plane.
And it would be, yep, okay, there's the flash, there's the aircraft hitting. And it was, again, we were saying, that's not the accident. We need to keep looking.
Finally, a lucky break.
Oh, hello there.
A camera from a rooftop helicopter pad has captured a short glimpse of the flight just before impact.
Can we enhance this one?
You just see the streak of the aircraft going down. And we were like, hey, we got something here.
The video reveals that the plane went into an extremely steep dive and reversed course in mid-air. But it doesn't reveal what caused the plane to suddenly change direction.
So 1 minute, they're under control heading towards the airport. Then all of a sudden, they're in a dive heading away from the airport. I don't even know how you turn around that fast.
We knew it was coming in this direction, and then all of a sudden, then the next thing we know, it's going in this direction. How does it get there? An airplane can't just automatically turn in flight and go down. So we had to determine what would actually have to happen in order to get that airplane in that position.
Investigators wonder if there was something wrong with the plane's control surfaces.
I guess if these spoilers were to fail just on one side, that could flip it.
The rudder, ailerons, and spoilers control the aircraft's movement through the air. A malfunction in one of them might have thrown the Learjet out of control.
If you have a spoiler that comes up on one wing and not the other, it can create a rolling moment that would cause an upset.
Investigators check the mechanism that moves the spoilers.
They are hydraulically operated. So was there hydraulic problems with the aircraft?
Spoilers were retracted, so that's not it.
There's no sign of any malfunction, and none of the plane's spoilers were deployed at impact. They couldn't have caused the problem. One by one, investigators carefully examine every control surface on the plane. They all check out.
We had no evidence to suggest that this was a mechanical failure in the aircraft.
It's another dead end. Investigators are no closer to understanding why a government-chartered Learjet suddenly veered off course and slammed into Mexico City.
Alvaro! What do we do, Alvaro?
Facing constant pressure from the highest levels in the Mexican government, investigators are running out of leads. They turn to what may be their last hope of understanding what brought down the Learjet: the cockpit voice recorder.
The cockpit voice recorder doesn't just give you voices, it gives you alarms, it gives you wind sound, any other relevant audio cue that can help you figure out what happened in that crucial moment of the flight.
We have a few minutes. Show me that report.
Despite some damage from fire and impact forces, technicians have been able to recover the recorded data.
We knew we didn't have FDR. We were glad to hear, though, that the CVR did work and that the accident flight had been captured.
All right, I think we waited long enough. Let's hear it.
Victor Mike Charlie, reduce your speed to 180 knots.
Reducing speed to 180, Mike Charlie.
Because it's a small aircraft, we could hear not just all the sounds that were in the cockpit, but we could also hear the sounds in the cabin.
We must be getting close.
As they listen to the moments just before the crash, they hear nothing out of the ordinary.
No, leave it.
Leave it for now.
One of the things that it did reassure us is that there was not an intentional act that brought down the aircraft. There was no sounds similar to a struggle. There was no sounds of an explosive device. And so that helped close the book on that aspect of the investigation.
The mystery of what did cause the crash persists.
Left down.
Investigators listen as the pilots descend towards the runway.
Look. Yeah. They're all lined up in front of us.
All seems well, until...
Turbulence from that thing. Oh, man.
One of the interesting things that we did hear was that the flight crew did mention turbulence.
What the hell?
All right, sounds like that's where the trouble starts. Where are we at? 14 seconds before hitting the ground.
It seems the Learjet hit a patch of violently unstable air.
Oh my God!
All of a sudden, boom, they're upside down, plummeting towards the ground.
Calvaro! What do we do? Calvaro!
Without the flight data, the voice recording leaves investigators with only a partial picture.
We don't know exactly what each of these pilots was thinking at the time. We don't know what control inputs were being made, but it shows that there was that confusion factor in the cockpit of what to do, how to recover the aircraft from the upset.
They don't seem to know what hit them.
Alvaro! What do we do, Alvaro? Give it to me! Give it to me!
You know, hearing that sound and, you know, putting myself in their place and knowing what that outcome is going to be, it's got to be horrible.
It's yours, Alvaro!
They tried to pull out, it wasn't enough. They had so little time, they had so little altitude.
We had a normal flight coming in, and then we had a loss of control relatively quick. There was no evidence of any mechanical failure.
So what do you think? Wake turbulence?
So we had to really look at the possibility of a wake turbulence event.
Wake turbulence forms when the low-pressure air above the wing draws high-pressure air upwards, creating a swirling vortex that trails behind the aircraft as it flies.
As a plane flies along, each of its wingtips is generating a tiny horizontal tornado called a wingtip vortex.
The powerful vortices can linger in the air for minutes at a time, creating an invisible hazard for other aircraft.
When a smaller plane flies into these rotating columns of air at low altitude, they can spin out of control and crash into the ground within seconds.
It's recommended that aircraft flying on the same flight path should stay about 5 miles apart at all times. If they get too close, it can be deadly. Perhaps wake turbulence can explain what knocked the Mexican government Learjet out of the sky. Investigators need to know more about the aircraft's approach to the runway. They speak to the air traffic controller on duty that night.
One of the air traffic controller's most crucial jobs is to separate those inbound planes, to keep them a safe distance apart so that they don't get into each other's wake turbulence.
The controller tells them he was busy that evening handling a lot of traffic.
Victor Mike Charlie, reduce your speed to 180 knots.
Imagine it's rush hour, planes are stacked up coming in from all over the country. This is the crunch time. This is when the air traffic controllers really earn their pay.
Victor, Mike, Charlie, please turn right and maintain 220 knots.
Around 6:30 p.m., the controller slotted the chartered Learjet in behind a much larger aircraft. A Boeing 767 was flying its approach directly in front of the Lear 45.
Just in time for rush hour.
But there was a problem. The Lear 45 wasn't hitting the speeds needed to hold its position in the lineup.
What a controller does is tell each aircraft how fast they should be going, if they should speed up, if they should slow down, and that it's very important for pilots to actually comply with each of those requests in order to maintain that separation.
Victor, Mike, Charlie, are you at 220 knots?
The controller had to remind the crew to speed up to 220 knots when they joined the line of landing planes.
Increasing speed.
Increasing speed right now.
Just a few minutes later, the Learjet 45 was descending too quickly.
First they were going too slow, then they were going too fast.
It seems the crew wasn't paying close attention to the controller's instructions. Could that explain the crash? Did carelessness on the part of the pilots lead to a fatal error in the cockpit?
What the hell?
Investigators need to know exactly how close the Learjet came to the 767. They analyzed data from air traffic control radar in the final minutes before the accident and make a surprising discovery.
Separation is not ideal, but it shouldn't have been a problem.
It seems the Learjet never got close enough to hit the 767's wake.
They got close to the preceding 767, but it wasn't something that was, oh, okay, they got within a mile. They were still about 4 miles away from the 767. It wasn't anything that was very apparent that a wake turbulence encounter would have caused this accident. So we had to go back and do a lot more work in order to understand why this particular day, at this particular time, that 767 wake turbulence affected the Lear 45.
What the hell? The turbulence from that thing.
Oh, man.
Conflicting evidence has brought the Lear 45 crash investigation to a surprising impasse. While the cockpit recording points to wake turbulence as the culprit, radar data suggests the government jet was never close enough to the plane in front for wake turbulence to be any problem. To try to resolve the conflict, investigators take an unusual step. They download the flight data recorder from the Boeing 767 that was flying ahead of the Learjet. If something was causing the 767 to produce more wake turbulence than usual, the plane's flight data should tell them.
The data from that preceding plane's flight data recorder, the speed, the flap settings, would give a good clue as to what kind of wake turbulence that plane would be putting out.
But the data reveals nothing unexpected. It seems the 767 was generating a normal amount of wake turbulence. Investigators are missing a piece of the puzzle. Then they factor in some additional information about the weather that changes everything.
One aspect of wake vortices is to understand the weather, the current weather that's going on.
They learned that the 767's wake vortices would have lingered for longer than usual, putting the Learjet in lethal danger. The reason? Extremely calm weather. The wind wasn't strong enough to disperse them.
Normally, you think of calm air, clear skies, no wind, great conditions for flying. Actually, calm air is worse for wingtip vortices because the wind doesn't break them up and chop them up into innocent pieces. Their danger remains potent.
We had a calm atmosphere. We had a heavy aircraft in front, we had a light aircraft behind. All the circumstances came together to have that trailing Lear 45 have an encounter with the wake turbulence of the 767.
The crew could see the 767 ahead of them.
He's starting to turn.
So, he's 5 miles from us.
But they mistakenly thought they were still a safe distance away.
When you look out your cockpit window, you see this tiny dot ahead of you. It's almost impossible to tell just by eyeballing it how close that plane in front of you really is.
Like a sledgehammer from above, the wake turbulence slammed into the smaller plane, flipping it over.
It's this powerful force, but you don't know that you're about to hit it until you're already in it.
This explains the mid-air change of direction.
The aircraft rolled around into a sort of a barrel roll, and then as it was coming around, they were pulling out. And if they would have had another maybe 1,000 feet or a couple thousand feet, that they could have actually recovered the aircraft.
You know, at that point, they're along for the ride, and you don't have time. You don't have time. Barely have time to realize that you're gonna die.
Severe wake turbulence on a calm day now appears to be the likely cause of the crash. But something doesn't sit right with investigators. They wonder why a crew entrusted with flying top government officials didn't use more caution, especially given the calm winds that evening.
Once the investigators realized that it most likely was a case of wake turbulence, the big question was, how did it creep up on the plane in front of it close enough that it hit that wake turbulence?
The key to a successful descent is reducing the plane's speed and altitude in a controlled way.
When you're coming into a busy airport at peak rush hour time, you don't have a lot of room for error. You can't screw up. You have to know what you're doing.
The 767 is coming down nice and steady. Now, look at the Lear.
The comparison of the 767's final descent with that of the Lear 45 reveals two different piloting techniques.
Should I pull the nose up? No, leave it. Leave it for now.
They are using a stepped approach.
The Learjet descends unevenly in a series of steps, speeding downward to lose altitude, then leveling off to slow down. The 767 ahead of them is descending on a steady slope towards the runway.
If a pilot's really in control of his airplane, he can lose altitude and lose speed at the same time. If he's not really in control, he'll focus on one or the other.
The Learjet pilots didn't successfully control either their speed or their altitude.
There, speed stabilized. Okay.
They flew too fast towards the plane ahead and dropped down too far.
Flaps down.
Right into the deadly vortex.
If they had stepped down and maintained the airspeeds that were requested of them by air traffic control, then this approach would have gone without a hitch.
Oh my God!
If you're not paying attention to air traffic control, if you're not paying attention to your speed, things can get beyond your control very quickly.
What do we do, Alvaro?
Let's hear it again, please.
Investigators need to know, how could the crew have made such a critical piloting error? The cockpit voice recorder points them to the answer.
Now we're going to put in the vertical nav all the way. Enter 1-2000.
They hear something unsettling from early in the flight.
1-2000. It won't let me. It doesn't indicate it either.
It has to be.
The pilots don't seem to know how to operate the Learjet's flight management system.
That's weird.
It's the system that controls most of the aircraft's critical functions.
It's really striking how they seem confused by the controls of their airplane. These guys are trying to figure out what knob does what dial means what. It's like guys who are just unboxing a VCR and trying to figure out how to program it.
Okay, I've heard enough.
For investigators, the discovery raises a troubling new issue.
What kind of pilots don't know how to program their plane?
All right, let's see what we have in these two.
Investigators dig into the work records of the two Learjet pilots. They're looking for anything that could account for the pilot's lack of proficiency in the cockpit.
What the hell?
They come across discrepancies in the pilot's certification for the aircraft.
Missing signatures.
When you look at the paperwork for the type certification for the Learjet 45, for both the pilot and the co-pilot, there were signatures missing, there were forms missing. It seemed that something was very fishy about how these guys got their type certification.
When they try to track down Captain Oliva's flight instructor,
Let me guess. No sign of the instructor.
they find no proof that any training took place.
We were very surprised to hear that this was happening at such a high level in the government, where it's not the president, but it's the equivalent of the vice president that's flying around with pilots that have very questionable training and backgrounds.
Investigators dig for further irregularities. They study Captain Oliva's logbook, where he kept a record of all his flights.
You call the flight school?
They contact the flight school where Captain Oliva trained. They learn that many of the training flights he claimed to have made never took place.
The flight school that provided that information definitely found that there were some issues with his command of the aircraft.
Investigators reach a shocking conclusion. The pilot in command of a Mexican government Learjet was a fraud.
It's pretty mind-boggling that a pilot would fake his own credentials. This is a plane that you're flying. You're in it. Your life is at stake, too. You'd think you would want to have the proper credentials to fly an airplane.
These guys were totally faking it.
The truth about Alvaro Sanchez and his qualifications is equally shocking. His claims to be a member of a Learjet 45 training team and an instructor are also proved false.
These are people who clearly were enamored of the convenience of cutting corners, taking advantage of some corruption somehow to fly a plane that they had no business being in, let alone flying.
We must be getting close.
It was their own fraud and deception that ultimately led the pilots into a situation they simply couldn't handle.
Shepard knows that. No, leave it. Leave it for now.
They found themselves piloting a powerful jet they didn't know how to control during a demanding descent in high-risk conditions. It all added up to a fatal outcome.
It's highly irresponsible. It's irresponsible because at that point you're putting yourself in danger, you're putting the people that you're flying, you're putting them in danger, you're violating their trust.
In the aftermath, Mexican authorities suspend the licenses of 2 flight schools suspected of issuing false training documents to the Learjet pilots.
Some of the recommendations from this accident was to have more oversight authority for these type of flights, because there is a need for these important political persons to have the best possible flight crews, the best possible aircraft, the best possible operation there is in order to have safe flights.
This job might have seemed like a really appealing one, to fly around one of the most important people in the country. And that might have made them feel like it was worth it to cut corners on their training and their credentials. But it was a heavy price to pay.